FIDO consists of two main operations. The first one is registration, where the key pair is created. And the second one is this key pair is used to authenticate the user. So in this video, let's discuss the details of the authentication. And let's look at this from an execution flow to see how all these entities interact with each other. So at this moment, the rely party knows that it wants to authenticate a user with FIDO. So the first step is, the idea is the RP at this moment, it needs to pass parameters about how to perform the authentication to the client. But before going to the client, the RP actually needs to go to the server to ask the FIDO server, I want to perform an authentication. Give me the request option. So FIDO calls these request options. Whenever the need is an authentication, it's called request options. So the request options is invoked, and what the FIDO server returns is, first of all, a challenge, which is a random string. The intention of the challenge is to avoid replay attacks. So that means that the FIDO server needs to understand whether this challenge has been used before or not, so a one-time use. And also the server needs to determine whether it was it who created this challenge. So no one injects something unknown and it is honored by this server. So it's about security. Another parameter is the RPID. So the RPID is to say, I want to use, is for the authenticator, I want to use only FIDO credentials that are associated to this domain. So RPID refers to the domain. So it's a selection of, okay, I'm trying to do an authentication for this domain. And obviously, this domain needs to match the context on the browsers, right? So it needs to be equivalent, those two values. Another parameter is allow credentials. Which is an array. It's an array that includes FIDO credentials IDs. So this is, if the server wants to limit, I'm willing to accept authentications only for these IDs. So the case where it is a non-discoverable credential where things are on the server, maybe the user has been identified, and based on that user, the FIDO server says, okay, this user has these IDs, so I'm willing to accept an authentication only for this ID. So this is the purpose of the credentials, allow credentials, and it's intended for the authenticator, right? So the authenticator needs to know what is permissible from an RP perspective on using. So this is the end of the first step. The second step is the call to the client, which is typically a browser. It's to say, hey, I want to perform an authentication, and these are the options. The client is going to make sure that whatever domain is in context right now corresponds to the selection of the RP ID. So whenever it goes to the authenticator using CTAP, client to authenticator protocol, it's going to include the options, but it's also going to add its own client data, which has to do with this verification of the origin, the RP. So the authenticator is now in control and is going to find, okay, what are the credentials that I know that are acceptable. It's going to interact with the user, and the authenticator somehow is going to say, oh, okay, this user is actually owns this ID, which is part of the allowed credentials, so we're fine. So on success, the authenticator is going to return, um, it's called authenticator data. One of the parameters that are inside this authenticator data is the credential ID. It's going to return also a signature. Um, and at the end, to the RP is also going to come back the client data. So the signature is mostly over the authenticator data that includes the credential ID and the client data. So this data is then passed to the authentication API. Um, so this data is passed to the server. Now, the server, what it needs to do is it needs to verify the signature, right? So, by the way, this is called the output of this operation is called an assertion, right? So basically, on the FIDO server, what needs to happen is the assertion is to be verified, which is the verification of a signature. The signature was created with the private key of the FIDO credential, right? So it belongs to the user. So the key of the user associated to this domain is used to create a signature over the authenticator data and the client data. This comes to the server, the FIDO server, and the FIDO server needs to verify that this is valid, um, and that's the idea for the authentication.